Pharisee Heresy, Heresy Pharisee. Jesus was a Pharisee, and that is no heresy. Jesus was an Hillel Pharisee. Yeah!
I am filled with Christ's love.
Welcome back to the Pharisee Heresy podcast with Dr. Vaden.
And Dr. Klein.
Dr. Vaden has been making an ironclad case for historicism, and we've been looking at some of the prophetic fulfillments, and he's going to dive into that a little bit today. But first, he wanted me to address the elephant in the room and talk a little bit, why do we call this the Pharisee Heresy podcast, and what is that all about? So we'll give you a little snippet today, and that's just simply, if you talk to Jesus in his day and you asked him what religion he was, he wouldn't say that he was Judaism or a Jew. He would say something like, he's like, I'm a Hebrew, believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he might even say that he was a Pharisee, and that might shock you, and that might sound like a heresy. There's the name. And there was two schools that we know of, and we mentioned Hillel a few times, and we'd love to dive into the history more and probably save that for a whole episode or two. But essentially, Hillel believed in the spirit of the law, and that's really what Jesus taught. He doesn't teach a negligence of the Torah. He just teaches a better understanding of it, because the Pharisees had become, and not just the Pharisees, but the Sadducees and all that, became very legalistic, and it all became about observance, and it wasn't about really loving God, loving your neighbor, just like Jesus mentions the two greatest commands. It's the same thing that Hillel says. He says the golden rule, essentially: what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. So it really echoes that, and it's even possible that Jesus met Hillel when he was 12 and staying in for Passover when he was at the temple, and he was learning from the sages. Hillel would still have been alive. And that's great history if you have time to read up on it. Josephus, who we've been talking about a lot as well, dives into this and gives us some insight into what exactly happened, what created the Pharisees. Like, we don't have these legalistic dudes in the Old Testament. We don't hear about them because mainly it's God's just trying to get them to keep the law, right? He's trying to, will you please keep the law? And they're like, I will exile you if you don't. And now we have these dudes that they're creating law. They're keeping too much of it.
You brought up some good points about, I think about this issue with the Pharisees, and a lot of people have a lot of hate for the Pharisees because of so often how Yeshua seems to contradict them or call them out as hypocrites or call them, lying brood of vipers and that sort of language. But if you think about it, Yeshua most criticized those who were possibly considered his own. If we would think of the Christians of today, who are we called to judge or call out or hold accountable would be those we consider our own and those who we should speak most critically of. So it makes sense that Yeshua would have those, debates and arguments with the Pharisees. And, not all Pharisees were hypocrites.
Just imagine Jesus came today, like Messiah came today, and he walked into your church. You don't think you think it would go well?
Right. Probably not.
Yeah,
Probably not.
And ignorance if you do, I think.
And you brought up good points too, about Hillel and Shammai, and how if you read the Gospels, you'll see evidence where Yeshua would make statements that were eerily similar to statements that Hillel would have made and have been documented to have been made. So there's a clear indication that on many instances Yeshua upheld the teachings of Hillel in contradistinction to the teachings of Shammai. And would that have been salient to the audience of the time? Yeah, he would have been making a point that, hey, I agree with this interpretation of the Torah, not this interpretation of the Torah, but let me even expound upon it fuller because I'm the one who wrote the Torah, right?
Yeah. And Judaism today is essentially the Pharisees kind of won out. And it is a mix. If you could break it down, it's a mix of Shammai and Hillel.
Right. And if I remember correctly, what does Pharisee mean?
It means set apart ones, and they're in the end credits of the last episode. That was one of the lyrics. To be set apart, it's not an art.
Set apart. Right. So it's kind of like how a lot of people today consider themselves holy or consider themselves to be followers of the way, as in the way, set apart or special or holy, like the right way. So like last time we talked a little bit about the stars and chronology and that sort of thing, and you have the preterists and the futurists, which is kind of interesting because most will say that the revelation to John was given and written around 96 CE, but then the preterist will say no way, it was given around 63, before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70. And so John was given all this revelation that was going to occur in the next 7 years.
It's like
so
that
interestingly,
meme you sent me, where it's the futurist believes all of prophecy is fulfilled in 7 years, and the preterist as well. You said from 63 to 70, and the futurist is just we got more time than that.
Right. So both camps kind of cram everything into this 7-year timeline, and there's like an obsession with the 7-year timeline.
And that's taken from Daniel, right? They get that 7 years from there.
Yeah, so you have the 70 weeks of Daniel, and it was a prophecy that from when the issue was decreed by Cyrus to rebuild Jerusalem, there would be a period of 70 weeks, interpreted as 70 weeks of years, or 490 years. And if you take that all the way to the time of Messiah, people will expound upon that and say that the Messiah fulfilled all but the last week of that prophecy, and therefore that last 7 years is held up for a time in the future. So the preterist would jump from approximately 30 CE or AD when he was crucified up to 63, and finish that final week up to 70.
It sounds like cheating.
Or thereabouts.
Is that cheating?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of cheating. And then the futurist would take that 70 years and they would stop at the crucifixion and start the timer again at the final 7 years of all the things that occur in Revelation with the tribulation and all that. So both camps are kind of, hunkered around this 7-year period, whereas the historicist would say, no, Revelation took place over hundreds of years, the fulfillment of the prophecies in Revelation, and we need only look to history to see that. So they're not limited to this 7-year belief. And we don't have to force or not completed. So yeah, they don't have to force this idea that the 7 years would be completed in prophecy and not completed in Messiah's ministry. So we can look at the prophecies from Daniel and see their fulfillment all the way from the time of that decree was given by Cyrus until the arrival of the Messiah and his ministry.
So you believe that
Makes sense?
490 years has been completed?
Yeah, I do believe that the 70 weeks were completed. And if you look at the prophecy, there are specific things that needed to occur in order for it to be fulfilled. Okay, so like one of those things would be to put an end to transgression or sin. Another one would be to make atonement and to anoint a most holy place. So we can all clearly agree that sin has not ended, although Yeshua provided atonement for sin. Okay, so in one sense, if you look at prophecy as patterned or circular, it was fulfilled and inaugurated fully on his crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and ascension, because he did make atonement for sin. Okay, but sin still exists in this world. And did he usher in everlasting righteousness? On one level, he did. He inaugurated that for all believers. But the fulfillment of everlasting righteousness has not come to consummation yet. So that's where I kind of have this idea of you have a lesser apocalypse and a greater apocalypse. Okay, first coming representing this lesser apocalypse because he inaugurated all these things that were supposed to have been fulfilled in this Daniel prophecy, but we know there comes a day when they'll be fully consummated at the marriage supper of the Lamb.
I guess I've kind of seen this in my own mind, is that there's kind of like a spiritual fulfillment, even like with things Paul talks about, that like, it's like, yes, you are like saved spiritually, but like physically, no, like you don't have a glorified body. Jesus literally hasn't come back with a sword and a white horse yet. So there, yeah, I have to guess I've always seen that duel, so I can get behind that. Is that kind of what you're
there's
saying,
like
or is
this.
that out in the weeds?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, we are seated with him in heavenly places. Yet, are we seated with him in heavenly places? You know, we are a kingdom of priests, a royal priesthood. Yet, this kingdom is in heaven. So, yeah. So there's this dual fulfillment going on, and even in this lesser apocalypse, one of the things that gets kind of gleaned over is the fact that when Yeshua rose from the dead, there was a mini resurrection of the saints. Many people came out of their graves.
Nobody talks about this.
I know.
There's dead
So
people wandering around Jerusalem. Like, it's
right, and this was in
weird.
like 30
Zombies.
CE.
Zombies.
Not even 70 CE, when it was apparently supposed to take place according to the preterists, this great the resurrection of the dead or whatever. So it's almost like he's saying, hey, these are signs of the fulfillment of this prophecy to confirm that this is it, but the ultimate fulfillment is still to come. There's still time. There's this time of the Gentiles for the fullness of the nations to come in before that great day.
Thank goodness, right?
Right. So 70 CE represented not the end of all time, not the end of all prophecy, but the judgment that would come upon Judea because of their rejection of the Messiah at the time of his visitation. Right? So he came in on that triumphal entry riding a donkey, and they rejected him. And so a time of visitation came upon the nation of Judea.
I would love to do a whole like defense of the Pharisees on that regard of condemning Jesus, because the Pharisees did comprise a large amount of the Sanhedrin. So why did they vote for him? But there were good Pharisees like Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea, probably a Pharisee as well, and a lot of Pharisees that accepted Jesus. So just defend the Pharisees there for a second. So, but continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have good Pharisees and bad Pharisees. It's like saying you have good Christians and bad Christians.
No,
you can't just condemn Christianity because you have bad Christians, or even because the majority of them are bad or corrupt, or you look at the modern church and you see how full of just greed and manipulation and all these things, and you don't want to just throw it all out as if it's all wrong or heretical.
It's like when people say all chiropractors are bad.
Yeah.
There's at least one
all of them
good
except
one.
for you and I, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I was just going to say just you.
Well, so let's back this up a little bit with some history and science. Go over, let's see, 23 through 26. Yeah, so I want to go over, I'm going to flip over to this page here and the book I'm working on, and just read a little bit, touch on absolute chronology. So we talked about, like, how do we know that time is what it is, right? So we have the ability to backtest dozens upon dozens of astronomical events to historical dates. And so
we looked at the
recording these events.
Birth of Christ last time, so that was cool.
Yeah, we touched on the birth of Christ. And, it's one thing to kind of speculate and say, hey, this might have occurred on this date because these things line up. It's another thing to have 2 points of reference to say, okay, history records this happened on this date in this location, like an eclipse, and this happened on another date in this location, this many years apart. Okay, so what that does is it narrows it down. Like in trigonometry, if you have 3 points, you can locate the central point of those three. Well, in chronology, if you have 2 points with a date, a location, and a time span between the two, you can essentially pinpoint exactly when this happened. Okay, so let me give you some example. Just so you know, as a reminder, like astronomical dating using a Julian day number has its year 0, but historical dating does not. So dates in BCE will vary by 1 year depending on which dating method is used. So the historical dating takes place 1 year later than astronomical dating. So, for example, if something happened in 2 BC according to astronomical dating, historically you'd say it took place in 3 BC because astronomical dating uses a year 0, whereas historical dating goes from 1 BC to 1 AD, right?
So astronomical dating would be 1 year behind historical. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so, yeah, depending on how you look at it. So, the historical dating would be 1 year earlier, so closer to creation,
Okay.
than
There's no
astronomical dating. Right. So here's an example with Pliny's chronometric dating. So we know a solar eclipse took place between 7 and 8 a.m. over Campania, Italy, 1,961 years ago on April 30th. Pliny the Elder recorded that in 59 AD. This is in Pliny's Natural History, Book 2, Chapter 10 and 72. He lived under Emperor Nero, and he saw the transition to the new Emperor Vespasian. And it was Vespasian's son Titus who destroyed the temple in 70. So Pliny also recorded a
Pliny
solar
was
and
Jewish as well, wasn't he?
I don't remember, probably, but I couldn't tell you for sure off the top of my head. So
I could be thinking the wrong guy.
yeah, I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you. I don't want to hang on that one, but he recorded a solar and a lunar eclipse within 15 days of each other. So you have a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse within 15 days of each other. So now we can go back to our software and say, okay, where in history do we have a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse within 15 days of each other? And they also occurred 12 years after the solar eclipse mentioned before by Pliny. Okay, so this is in Natural History, Book 2, Chapter 37. So we can verify this with astronomical models. Okay, so they can prove that there have been 1,954 years that have passed since 70 CE. So now we know, okay, definitely this amount of time has taken place since then. Another thing we can do is we can look at, there's a Babylonian cuneiform tablet. It's called Text BM 33066, and it records a lunar eclipse that occurred during the 7th year of the Persian king Cambyses. So we can pinpoint this celestial event to July 16th, 523 BC. So it's this same lunar eclipse recorded on this Babylonian tablet is also mentioned in Ptolemy's Almagest, Book 5, Chapter 14. And he says that it occurred 1 hour before midnight in Babylon. He says that this lunar eclipse occurred 1 hour before midnight in Babylon and 110 minutes before midnight in Alexandria, Egypt on the 17th of Phamenoth, which is the 7th month in the Egyptian calendar. Look at Alexandria 1 minute before midnight in ancient Babylonia. We can see this occurring. This is Alexandria 110 minutes from midnight and 1 hour before midnight in Babylonia. So we can go back and backtest these dates. So let me kind of repeat that. So a lunar eclipse occurred during the 7th year of Persian Cambyses. It's also mentioned by Ptolemy, occurring 1 hour before midnight in Babylon and 110 minutes before midnight in Alexandria, Egypt. So you have two locations.
Two historians and two locations.
Two historians, two locations. We can look at those locations and see that that did happen. We can verify this. This is an example of chronological locks, things that we can rely upon to determine an absolute chronology for an event in history.
Seems ironclad.
Yeah. So this is just a little bit about Jonah's sign, but yeah, so Claudius Ptolemy reports some 19 lunar eclipses in his astronomical treatise known today as the Almagest. And these are eclipses that occurred in Babylon, Babylonia, Alexandria, Egypt. Okay, so the point is that it's a cop-out to simply say, oh, well, we can't trust, we can't trust our history books. We can't trust that time has actually happened. So, all right, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Sounds good. Continue on.
All right, so we touched on absolute chronology and talked a little bit about how we can be sure that our dating schemes are correct. And we talked about the 7 years, preterist versus futurist. So I'm going to take us to a section here. Let me find page 12 here. Yeah. And talk about some of the scriptures regarding, here we go, regarding prophecy. So, the Yeshua talks about the days of vengeance, right? And a lot of times that comes up, and the preterists talk about how the days of vengeance occurred in 70 CE. And I think in the first video we talked about how the days of vengeance is a theme. It's a phrase or descriptor about judgment coming. Yes, we talked about several examples of that happen. And we also know that there's a physical building of the kingdom that's described in like Isaiah 61. And these occur after these days of vengeance. And it happens in the historical and covenantally promised land of Israel. And if you look at Genesis 13:15, where the ancient ruins are. And Isaiah 61:4 says that they will rebuild the ancient ruins. They will restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Okay, so if the preterists claim that the days of visitation occurred in 70 CE, and then after about three and a half years, God established his millennial reign right then and there, okay, what you have is a destruction of the temple and all these ruins when every stone would come down. But could you define 3 years as many generations of desolation? No, because it wouldn't even constitute 1 generation of desolation. So here you have an immediate problem where you're going to rebuild these ancient ruins after many desolations of many generations. So it just doesn't match up. There would have to be a desolation that occurs for many generations before the rebuilding of the ancient ruins would occur under the Messiah. Okay, so
typically a generation, 100 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, some people say 80 years. Some people even bring it down as 40. But in no sense of the definition of generation would it constitute 3 years from 70 to 73. Okay, so this phrase is consistent with how Ezekiel, the prophet, described the physical location of the temple and the holy city when he mentioned the ancient ruins. So these locations of this millennial temple to be built are in the historic lands. And there's direct indication they have been devastated for many generations. And so Yeshua came to fulfill the year of Yahweh's favor and not the ultimate days of vengeance. Yes, there was a days of vengeance that occurred in 70 CE, but not this ultimate fulfillment of the days of vengeance when Jerusalem would lie desolate for many generations. Okay, so and you can't make the claim that it was already desolate prior, leading up to 70, because Yeshua said that there would be an abomination of desolation to come, to watch out for. Okay, so if this abomination of desolation came, then Jerusalem would have to lie waste and desolate for many generations before it would be rebuilt, not 3 years. Do you see where I'm going with that?
It's just, I don't even understand how they could say that. It's just clearly post 70 AD is the severe destruction.
Right, but that's right, and so that's this claim, and so the regular partial preterists will say, well, this rebuilding was this spiritual temple of believers, yet the descriptions are of rebuilding in the historic land of Israel in the ancient ruins, not just this spiritual idea. So the material preterists would say, yeah, the physical rebuilding of the kingdom occurred during this time right after 70, but no generations of desolation had occurred. And we look at this phrase, abomination of desolation, and it used to confuse me a lot because I was like, what does desolation mean? What is all that? Desolation simply means that the town, the city, the empire lay desolate, abandoned, a wasteland, unusable, unfit. And so what would bring about a desolation? Well, a conquering army would come and destroy, pillage, burn, and leave this place desolate. Okay, so now an abomination that causes desolation would be something profane, something that is high-handed in the face of God, that promotes idolatry. And that's exactly what the Romans were, because when they marched upon Jerusalem, they carried their incense and their flags and their images. So, if you look at prophetic scriptures like Isaiah 61, where it talks about the rebuilding of the ancient ruins, it talks about they will restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities, the desolations of many generations. Okay, so the building of this physical kingdom by the Messiah after the days of vengeance, like everyone talks about, takes place in the covenantly promised land of Israel that you look at, you'll find in Genesis 13 and 15, where these ancient ruins are. So if we're restoring ancient ruins after many generations of desolation and devastation, when the Messiah returns to regather all his people, then we should expect to see many generations of desolation that occurred before this happens, between the days of vengeance and his return to rebuild. So what happens is, your material preterists who say that the destruction occurred in 70 will then say that the millennial kingdom began in 73. However, if you have these days of vengeance occurring in 70 with the destruction of the temple and every stone being torn down, it does not fit many generations of desolation. It only fits 3 years of desolation. Okay, and we know that you can't say that the desolation was already an occurrence before the time or during the time of Yeshua, because he said there was a desolation to come. He said, be watchful for the abomination that brings desolation. And when you see it, flee to the mountains. And that's exactly what the Christians did when they fled to Perea, when they saw the Roman armies surrounding Jerusalem. This was around 66. And so they saw them, they fled. The Romans came back madder than ever and besieged the entire city. So it gave the Christians the ability to see this happening and flee, and then before the Romans fully engaged in their siege. Okay, so essentially many generations could not have occurred between 70 and 73, right? So this abomination that brings desolation I've thought about this phrase before. What does desolation mean? It always confused me. But desolation means that when the conquering entity comes, they leave the place desolate, right? Nothing, it's a wasteland, it's unusable, right? And so it's abandoned. And an abomination means something that's profane before God. So the Roman armies would gather and they would carry with them their imago, or the image of their Caesar or their God. And they would carry these signs into battle with them. And so Yeshua warned them, when you see the abomination that brings desolation, flee. And that's exactly what they did. All right. So the point is, the material prophets claim that the days surrounding 70 CE were these days of vengeance where God would reign immediately thereafter. But this can't be the case, because the rebuilding of the temple by God's hand should occur after many generations of desolation. So, in fact, this temple that was built wasn't even complete until 63 CE. Right? It wasn't even complete till then. So there's no possible way that the temple could have been desolate for many generations by 73 CE, when they say this millennial reign began. Right? And another point to that is
Herod's temple wasn't complete till 63.
Yeah, so it was functional, but it was not fully completed and developed until 63. You remember in John, the Pharisees come to Yeshua and they say, hasn't this temple been being built for, I think they said 46 years, right, since Herod decided to enlarge and rebuild it? So I think that was in like 20 BC when he started. So by the time the Pharisees had this conversation with Yeshua, they said, hasn't it been being built for the past 46 years? So it wasn't even fully completed until 63. They were still adding on and building to it. So if Yahweh came and defeated his enemies in 70 CE, why would he let it lay in ruins for 3 years? Really, none of it really adds up when you analyze it. What makes sense is that if it was destroyed in 70 CE, and as we know it's laid desolate from that point until now, it has certainly been many generations, and it would fit his coming to rebuild the ancient ruins when he does return. That does fit today. So that's like a +1 for the futurist or the historicist camp, and a -1 for the preterist camp.
Yeah, that's easy for us in the futurist camp, right? That's what we're looking for.
Right, that's an easy one for the
Ezekiel's
futurist
temple,
camp.
right? The millennial temple.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, like, where was it in history? It's hiding in the North Pole, or what is the answer there?
Right, and so I think that would be like their answer is that he established a new Zion at the North Pole. But again,
there's the
with the covenant
answer too, which would be that it's a spiritual temple of some sort.
Yes,
okay.
Spiritual temple. So both cannot both be true, that there is a spiritual temple and a physical temple, right? Because cannot Yeshua, when he ascended to heaven and seen by the guy that was martyred, what's his name? Can't think of his name. He saw Yeshua sitting at the right hand of God, right? When he was stoned. Stephen, thank you. Yeshua was reigning in heaven, and he established a kingdom of priests on the earth, for sure, which is a royal priesthood, okay, which is us, a spiritual kingdom. All right, all the stones being put together to build the temple of God. Right, yet this also does not fulfill the rebuilding of the ancient ruins in the covenantally promised land of Israel. Okay, so Mount Zion in the North Pole does not fit the covenantally promised land of Israel in the Scripture. So let's look a little bit more about what Yeshua said regarding his coming. In Matthew 24:27, he said, "For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." All right, and so we've looked at this and like think, well, what does this mean? Some people said, well, maybe it was because the Roman armies, came from the east and attacked. Yet the Romans actually came from west to east, not east to west. Okay, and the siege lasted. So the war started years before the siege, and the siege lasted about 5 months. So certainly this didn't occur quickly. So his sign wasn't about it occurring quickly or the direction from which it came. It's simply saying that everyone would see it, just as lightning flashes from east to west. Everyone is going to see it and know that it happened. It's going to be obvious that it happened. And so, another sign that he gives, saying, yeah, you'll know this happened, is he says, wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Right? So many have prognosticated on what possibly this could mean. Does this mean that, this is just the rapture, the vultures gathering, and all this sort of stuff? Well, it's just a proverb that's just saying, well, okay, when you see vultures flying above, what do you know is beneath them?
Something did.
Yes, something did. So he's just saying, look, guys, where there's a carcass, the vultures gather. Where the vultures gather, there's a carcass. You're going to know it happened. Like you're going to see signs. It's going to be easily visible to all that this happened.
And there was the Galilee was, I forget when, was it 66 or 68? It was taken well before Jerusalem.
Right. Yeah, that's right. They like I said, like the war started years before, and they eventually besieged
when
Jerusalem.
Josephus was captured too. He was a Galilean, the Pharisee from Galilee.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't remember, but yeah.
He was captured by Vespasian. Vespasian returned to Rome before he decided to. And he took Josephus with him because Josephus said, "I had a vision that you'd be emperor." He's like, "All right, I'll keep you alive until until I see if that happens."
People make fun of Josephus because it seems like he played both sides, but in reality, if you know the history, you know that there was not just one side. There were at least 3 factions of Jews fighting each other for control of the Temple Mount in their efforts against the Romans, and they would assassinate and slaughter each other to maintain control.
Read Wars of the Jews. And
exactly. And Josephus is like, look, dude, this is all wrong. I'm not going to have any part of this. So
he was apparently struck by a stone from the wall, trying to talk sense into the Jews.
Yeah, he was, honestly, a pretty smart guy.
He wanted to preserve, he knew Titus would preserve the city if they would just surrender. Titus didn't want to destroy the temple.
Right. But they were intent.
Yeah.
And Yeshua warned his followers not to be like that. So birds of prey, like vultures, are also representative of nations coming to destroy. You can see that elsewhere. So if you look at Isaiah 46, it says in verse 10, I declare the end from the beginning and ancient times from what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand and all my good pleasure I will accomplish. I summon a bird of prey from the east, a man for my purpose from a far-off land. Truly I have spoken, and truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, and I will surely do it. So he was referring to Cyrus, who came from the east in Persia to conquer Babylon in 539 BCE. And Cyrus's standard was actually a bird of prey affixed to a sphere, just like the Roman eagle standard that they would carry into battle. So this wasn't like a novel concept, but it's a repetition of a theme. We see this so often. A mighty conqueror coming to devour his enemies as swiftly as a bird of prey. Ezekiel uses this imagery Ezekiel 39:4. He's referring to God judging Gog and Magog. He says, "On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to every kind of ravenous bird and wild beast." Okay, so again, when we see these, what seem to be like code phrases that we try to interpret in different ways, the best thing we can do is go back in Scripture and see how they were used in history before. And we see that the theme, that the idea of this is about a conqueror coming to bring judgment. And that's so important to grasp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and judgment during 70 AD is different than like what we see prophetically, like the judgment against the nations. I see these as two different things. I don't think the Jews are necessarily being punished for what they did. I mean, yes, they had time. They had these 40 years to recognize Messiah, and they didn't. I think in a way he had to destroy the temple just so they wouldn't persist in their ignorance. But it was out of love, right? It's just hard to say, call it judgment in my mind, because the wrath and judgment is reserved for not God's people, right? He chides, and just like he did with the Pharisees, he wants to shock them. He uses hyperbole, and I see that with, 1 million people died, 1 million people went into slavery, according to Josephus. It was a terrible time, but it was all for the greater good. So as people would grow to lean on him more and recognize their error, and it was all very selfish. Everything that happened in 70 AD, the Herodians and the Idumeans, and like you said, all the different factions just fighting each other for control of the temple. Maybe they could even beat the Romans if they just weren't. They were just so distracted.
Yeah, they were intent on preserving their way of life, and unfortunately rejected the Messiah when he came. So we talk about judgment on the nations, and this phrase comes up, the time of the Gentiles and the trampling of the saints. And if you think about, like, what does the time of the Gentiles mean? My opinion is that the time of the Gentiles started with Babylon, because the Gentiles represent all nations other than Israel. So the time that the Gentiles would truly trample the courts of God refers to any time that Gentiles are given sovereignty over the covenantally promised land of Israel. Okay, so a time of the nations could refer to Babylon, the first beast, and also the Medo-Persian Empire, the second beast, and then the Greek Empire, the third beast, and then the Roman Empire, the fourth beast, until the time of these empires is expired and the fullness of the nations has come into covenant, and the Messiah returns. Okay, so Paul talks about the time of the Gentiles and till the fullness of the nations comes in. Well, the time of the Gentiles simply means this time that these Gentile nations reigned sovereignly over this covenantally promised land.
It wasn't until, I think, John Hyrcanus that Judea was freed. That would have been around like 90 BCE. So even, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel's temple, all that, they're still under Persian control and Greek control, the Seleucids.
Mm-hmm.
And they're and even then, like, Judah Maccabee had made a treaty with Rome, and then John Hyrcanus is like, wait, don't we have a treaty with Rome? It's like, let's be free of the Greeks. And it's like they still just kind of changed hands. And then eventually that led into Herod's and being back fully under control of Rome. So it was a very short, brief window when they weren't sovereign by themselves, just a handful of years, like you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic point. The only reason they were allowed to rebuild was because Cyrus and Xerxes and Darius, gave them permission to do so until the other empires conquered them, and then they allowed them to continue. So they were never fully this free state to go and do what they will. Good point with Herod too, who was an Idumean, that basically garnered support from the Romans and annihilated the Hasmonean dynasty, and then again they were fully subject to Rome.
He married into it.
Yeah. And so Yeshua said that now judgment is come upon this world. Now the prince of this world will be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw everyone to myself. So the world referred to the current kingdom that reigned over the known world, which is Rome. And this referred to the fourth kingdom of Daniel 2:37 through 44. So if you recall, in Daniel 2, these kingdoms were said to have reigned over the whole earth. Okay, so when this interpretation of the dream is given, he said that these four kingdoms refer to the Babylonians, Medo-Persians, Greeks, and then, although it's not explicitly stated, we know the next kingdom to follow is the Romans. And then we know that the Messiah would arrive on the scene during this time of this fourth kingdom. So the Messiah was expected to return during this kingdom of Rome. So the whole earth in Scripture doesn't refer to the globe. It refers to the dominant power structure of the known world that ruled and dominated the covenantally promised land of Israel. So these power structures were Gentile nations that were at times used by God to either subjugate or liberate the children of Israel. But their king was not Yahweh. Their king was the prince of the power of the air, Satan. And so that's why if Yeshua says, I'm coming to cast out the prince of this world, he's talking about defeating Satan. And so Yeshua sat at the right hand of God, and then shortly began pouring out his judgments when he started opening the seals that John gives us in Revelation.
I think one thing that struck me before is that this, all these different empires, but it's one statue, right? It's really just, and if you look at the history, it's kind of, they all had control of the city of Babylon. It's really just a lot of the same geography. Like the Seleucid Empire looks pretty much like the Persian Empire. It's just changing hands. It's the same ideals getting passed on. Like there was really a break. I mean, Persia was more of a break for Israel. It was a better time. Syria,
it's one body.
Babylon, not so good.
Right. It's described as four different beasts, but it's also described as one statue, one body with a head, shoulders, arms, torso, legs, feet, toes.
It's crushed by right. a boulder that turns into a mountain, which is a picture of Mount Zion and the New Jerusalem.
That's right. The stone, the mighty stone, Yeshua. And so, Ephesians 2 says, you were dead in your trespasses and sins, which you used to walk when you conformed to the ways of this world and the ruler of the power of the air, the spirit who is now at work in the sons of disobedience. So this concept of Gentile kings being spiritually ruled by Satan, it brings clarity to passages like Isaiah 14:12, where the king of Babylon serves as a reference to Satan. So if you read, we can look at it real quick if you want. Isaiah 14:12. Let me bring it up here. And so this is one of those instances where, like, we look in Scripture we talk about this as a reference to Satan. It says, "How you have fallen from Satan, O day star, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the ground, O destroyer of nations." Okay, if he's fallen from heaven and he's called the day star, it sounds a lot like Satan. Yet, if you look at verse 3 and 4, it clearly identifies the subject as the king of Babylon, Belshazzar. Okay, and then so here you have the king of Babylon being referenced as Satan. Okay, so then if we look at another one is Ezekiel 28, 12 through 14. Let me pull that up. So Ezekiel 28, verse 12, it says, okay, the word of Yahweh came to me, Son of man, take up a lament for the king of Tyre, and tell him this is what Yahweh Elohim says. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every kind of precious stone adorned you: ruby, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald. Your mountings and settings were crafted in gold, prepared on the day of your creation. You were anointed as a guardian cherub. For I had ordained you, you were on the holy mountain of God. You walked among the fiery stones.
How's the king of Tyre in the Garden of Eden?
Exactly. How is the king of Tyre in the Garden of Eden? Well, the king of Tyre represents the enemies of Israel, God's covenantally promised people. So when God uses this language referring to these Gentile kings that subjugated his covenant people, what he's referring to is the spiritual entity behind those kings, which is always one and the same, which is Satan. So now when you see this, the beast in Revelation, you have this sea beast with 10 horns and a dragon with 7 heads. You can see how the imagery portrays a national entity with different kings, pieces, and parts, but its underlying spiritual entity is the red dragon. Right? This the Satan entity that is the spiritual entity behind it. So Rome, I'll try to land this plane here, but Rome came to see its demise around 476 CE when the Western Empire was conquered by Odoacer the barbarian. He led the Heruli and dethroned Romulus Augustus. Okay, so this last empire of the Western Roman Empire. Okay, so Yeshua was on the scene 450 years prior to this, and where he says, I'm going to cast out the ruler of this world. So if it was the Heruli that gave this massive blow to the head to the Roman Empire, how is it that Yeshua said he would be the one to cast out the prince of this world? Right. So the answer is that Yeshua is the one who orchestrated all these events when he began opening the seals of Revelation.
I feel like you need to expound on that a little bit more for me.
Yeah, I know that was a huge
That's
step
like
into
next time on Pharisee Heresy.
Yeah, that was like a next time on.
I'm like waiting. I'm like, and he did that how?
Yeah, I mean, when you go through the seals, you see that again. The first 4 seals are these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? You've got the white horse that we talked about last time with these 5 Cretan emperors, the first being Nerva. Right. And then you have the red horse of civil war. Cretans. You have the black horse of famine and plague, and then the pale green horse of death and terror coming after that. And so what's happening is, as he's progressively opening up these seals, you start to see the history of Rome play out before your eyes, and then the angels start blowing the trumpets,
And
right? And
Attila the
so
Hun.
Attila the Hun, I believe, is the third trumpet.
Okay, I knew he was in there
Yeah.
somewhere.
So you've got,
Giving
the first
giving
trumpet
it to the
is
Romans.
the Goths, and they destroy about a third of the earth, the Roman Empire. And you have the second trump being the Vandals, being led by Genseric, known as the Tyrant of the Seas, and he attacked all the coastal towns through his navy that set out from his base in Carthage, North Africa. So about a third of the sea. And then you have Attila the Hun, when they cross the Danube and follow all the rivers through uh, through the close to Constantinople, although they never took it. And then they went to Gaul, and they went through the Alps, crossed the Julian Alps into the Po River Valley, and they just absolutely defeated, unconquered, undefeated the Romans. And so, and at about that time, you're getting really close to 476 when it was finally overthrown by the Heruli. So all these seals and trumpets play forth this event where Yeshua is progressively dealing a death blow to this empire before you see the transition of this empire. So that's where historicism comes in to kind of play this out. And the same visions that John received are the ones that Daniel received, although Daniel's visions were limited. Okay, so Daniel saw for a certain time, from his time forward, and glimpses of this end. So if you look in Revelation 5:1, it says there are 7 seals on the scroll to be opened. And verse 11 describes this scene that John sees in the throne of heaven as having myriads of myriads and thousands of angels and living creatures and elders surrounding the throne. If you look in the scene described in Daniel chapter 7, it says, this is verse 9 and 10, as I continued to watch, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a flaming fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from his presence. Thousands upon thousands attended him, and myriads upon myriads stood before him. The court was convened, and the books were opened. So these books referred to the scroll containing 7 seals, each with separate decrees. So it's the visions are describing the same event, but revealed hundreds of years apart in separate visions to Daniel and John. So Daniel's vision describes how, following the opening of the books, the destruction of the 4th kingdom Rome entailed, and much less details given to Daniel, but further details and the contents of these seals were revealed to John. So it was a progressive revelation over time, and they connect. Maybe that's somewhere that we can go next time.
Yeah, I think that'd be great to get into some of the specifics, but that gives a good overview of where we're going and why the end of Rome is important.
And if we take anything away from this, it is clearly Daniel's given a vision of 4 Gentile nations that would rule over Israel, right? And so he's given Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And that's about as far as he can see.
And would you say that the end of the Roman Empire was also the end of the feat of iron and clay, or is that something that Rome transitioned into, like the Holy Roman Empire or the Third Reich or anything like that?
That's a fantastic question. So let me pop an image up that will help with that. I'll pull it up here in just a second. Go. Can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
So we have we have this head of gold, the Babylonian Empire. Medo-Persian Empire is this chest and arms of silver. Thighs of bronze is the Macedonian or Greek Empire. And then the legs of iron being the Roman Empire. And then being further divided into feet of iron and clay. Okay, so if you look at Rome, Rome was divided between the eastern and western portions of the empire. And this was not an official division until 395.
The Byzantium or whatever.
Yeah, Byzantium being the eastern, where we get the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so which was conquered by the Turks, became the Ottoman Empire. But so this eastern and western division, now they didn't actually call it that at the time, but in 395, Emperor Diocletian, he officially created the Tetrarchy, and he divided the kingdom in two, eastern and western, and he placed the Augustus and Caesar under each division. So the West would have an Augustus, which was the head honcho, and a Caesar under him, and the East would have an Augustus and a Caesar under him. Okay, and so that was the official division. But all leading up this time, you had, in essence, this Eastern and Western, and towards the end, before Rome, Western Empire fell, the Eastern division was relatively stronger, relatively safer, and the Western division was completely conquered and divided into approximately 10 divisions or nations led by these different kings of different Germanic tribes, like the Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, the Saxons, all these different groups of peoples. And so, yeah, after 395, that was the last time that you had any semblance of a central rule over the entire empire. From that point forward, it was permanently subdivided
that would be
into
the
two,
division of the feet of iron and clay.
which makes sense that would be the picture there that you would see. And then the feet, which eventually become mingled with clay, and the 10 toes being 10 divisions of the Roman Empire. So what the clay means is up for interpretation, right? So is the clay referring to Germanic tribes that intermingled with the Romans that never truly mixed? Or is the clay referring to the amalgamation of Islamic peoples into the empire, into Europe as we know it today? That's kind of up to interpretation. It's something I haven't fully landed on just quite yet. Let's see if I have anything else there.
We don't expect you to know everything, Daniel.
Well, thank you.
But next time we do.
Yeah. But next time I must know it all.
Just know it all out. And then getting into like the papacy and all that, I think you've been doing some work on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of working our way through 2,000 years of history.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so after explaining some of that, which may have been slightly jumbled together, I mean, what comes up for you? What doesn't quite make sense?
You said Jesus kind of set the stage for all this, with the seals and all that. You just expound on that a little bit more, like how he did that.
Okay. Yeah, so
no, he's gonna do that, Daniel. He hasn't done that yet. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
it's the futurist.
So Yeshua, if he's reigning with his kingdom in heaven, right, and you see the souls of all the martyred saints before the altar, under the altar, and the incense of the prayers of the saints rises up to him, right, and you get this picture of there's only one who's able to open the seals, and that is the Lamb, which interestingly enough is worshipped by the elders and the cherubim, saying, "Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh and his Lamb." So if anybody has a problem with worshiping Yeshua, I want to send you right there and let you know that it's okay. And so he's there at the right hand of God, and he begins to open these seals because he's the only one found worthy, because he's the one who is able to cast out the ruler of this world. And as he begins opening those seals, progressively plays out the demise of this Roman Empire and the rest of history as it unfolds leading up to the present day. So we'll have to kind of work our way through that. In other words, it wasn't a one-time event that occurred immediately. It was this progressive event as he continued to progressively open seals, blast trumpets, and pour out the vials or the golden bowls on the earth. So this judgment would take place over hundreds of years.
And the Pharisee in me would have to say that, Rome was Christian right under Constantine. It's like it was a good time for Christians, but it wasn't a good time for Jews. There was a lot of edicts against Jews, celebrating their feasts and keeping Sabbath, and there was a lot against them there. And that's, cause I could say, true believers would have been observant still. There would have been a division. They still would have believed in Messiah, but they still would have been holding on to those Pharisaical roots, I believe. And that's where we start seeing the strong division between Judaism and Christianity with Constantine and all that.
Constantine is heralded as this Christian hero in so many people's minds, where he, what happened was you had these intense persecutions that took place against Christians, leading to the most intense persecution between 303 and 312, known as the Diocletianic persecution, when Emperor Diocletian severely persecuted, executed Christians and all that sort of stuff, which was put to an end in 313 under Constantine's Edict of Milan, where he pronounced religious freedom to Christians, but not just Christians, all people. So if you were pagan, if you're Christian, you were free to practice what you wanted to. And so a lot of people say, oh, he became a Christian then. Well, Constantine retained the title of Pontifex Maximus, which means master bridge builder, and it was used by the Roman emperors before him and used by the popes today, this title. And Constantine, a lot of people may not know, he didn't make Sunday the Sabbath. What he did was he said that if you lived in town, then you need not work on Sunday in veneration of the sun. But if you were a farmer, you still needed to work because that was the best day to plant. So he wasn't upholding a Sabbath or changing the Sabbath or moving the Sabbath. He also continued to put pagan symbols of pagan gods on his coins. He murdered his own, I believe it was his son, because he was falsely accused of adultery. This was a year before his death. And then apparently he finally converted and was baptized just shortly prior to his death to Christianity. What he did was he set the stage for freedom of Christianity to begin to develop and basically amalgamate with the Roman religion. It's to where the two could start to become one. And then the Edict of Thessalonica, I think it was in 365 or 385, I don't remember, made Christianity the state religion of Rome. So now you have a combination of religion and state. And so now you can have councils like the Council of Nicaea, which defined Christianity and defined hereticism. And so now the state can say who's a heretic and who's not. And that's how the Roman papacy started to gain traction and have power over the true saints who would not take part in that. So he set the stage.
Call the book Pagan to Papacy. Like, how did we
Pagan
get
to
there?
Papacy. Yeah. Yeah. So it's, man, it's just like there's so much history and it's so hard to remember it all,
It's
and
hurting
I'm
your
not good
brain,
at
I can see.
remembering. But it's like,
Getting attacked by
if
cats.
we, yes, if we know history, it just opens up the scriptures so much, and that's what one of the biggest things I'm learning is I have to know history.
It's
I
not
have
a
to learn it.
flex, just need a little cultural context. It's not complex. Oh, can't you see? It's not a heresy. Be a Pharisee. Oh, no, 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 no. I'm just like he. Yeah, yeah. Pharisee. Heresy. To be set apart. It's not an art. I just put the horse before the cart. You wanna be a servant, but you're not observant like the Pharisee. Oh, no, 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 I'm just like he. Hey, yeah, Pharisee. Pharisee. I'm a Pharisee follower. DC Talk told me love's a verb, and that's why I observe the Torah, just like Yeshua. Ashima, Zedekiah, Emunah, and Teshuvah. Shema, Zedekiah, Emunah, and Teshuvah. Just like Yeshua. The greatest of the Pharisees. Oh yeah, I just wanna be like he.